I just played a game, an over-the-board in-person game that was one of the most brutal games I've played in a while, and I think it really shows why I am a 1900 rated player. So, tournament details in the description below. So, my opponent started off with e4, and I did the good old Karakhan, and he went for knight f3, and so usually when they go knight f3, they might go knight c3, and it's the two knights Karakhan. But in this case, my opponent actually exchanged and did something that's very rare. He played bishop b5 check. This is not a super common way to play. Oh, and side note, this is the no engine recap until the very end. So I like to analyze my games without an engine, and then at the end, just for so everyone can see, we can compare my thoughts to the game review, and hopefully we both learn something through this process. Anyways, so bishop b5 check is not a very common move. I would say it's definitely not the most critical way to play. Usually the bishop goes on d3 after d4 is played, and sometimes usually not even the knight goes to f3. But this is totally fine though, and I actually played bishop d7. I thought about knight c6, but I thought that was unnecessary. And after knight e5, attacking the knight a bunch of times, then I might go bishop d7 and give up my bishop pair like that. Bishop d7 just seems like the better move because now a lot of times in the Karakhan, I'm happy to trade off this light squared bishop, but if I can trade off my light squared bishop for their light squared bishop, that's usually pretty good. This is usually pretty good for the black for the side with the black pieces, especially in the Karakhan. So he takes, and I took with the queen because I think my knight belongs on c6, where it kind of guards against the center pretty well. If I took with a knight, then this knight's movement gets a little bit restricted by the pawn. Although it's not that big of a deal, I think taking with the knight is totally fine too. I just think that taking with the queen is probably slightly better. Although probably both are just totally fine. My opponent plays d4, and I develop my knight. So we're both doing very, very normal moves, putting pawns in the center, putting our knights and bishops out. So nothing really to see here, anything special. And now he plays c3. I was kind of expecting him to play bishop f4. I think that's it gets the bishop on a strong diagonal. And now if I want to put my bishop on the strong diagonal, on this diagonal, then we have to trade, which I feel like, judging from the opening, he wouldn't mind doing. So I was kind of surprised. I was mildly surprised when he did c3 instead, because now I can put my bishop on this diagonal, and he cannot trade off his dark squared bishop. And by definition, this dark squared bishop for white is actually a bad bishop because the pawns in the center are the same color as that bishop. So by definition, it's a bad bishop. Although not all bad bishops are bad and not all good bishops are good. I just got back from a long drive. It is late at night. I'm thirsty. Anyways, so we're both developing. And he goes bishop g5. So since he can't develop his bishop to f4, he just goes to f5 or g5, which totally makes sense. Already here, I was considering h6, kicking the bishop, and then knight g e7. I was considering that. I was also even considering f6 right now as well. I'm not sure if I wanted to play it or not because I think it actually helps bring his bishop back where he wants to go. I think he wants to rotate his bishop back to g3. So I wasn't too hasty in playing f6 or h6 because I know he wants to bring his bishop back anyways. That was my idea, at least. So I go knight e7, and he develops his knight, and I castle, and he goes rook c1. So it's a bit interesting. Rook c1 is kind of an interesting move. It implies that c4 is going to be a move. And the interesting thing about c4, like if I just played a6, for example, and c4, I probably want to take. And this position, white is stuck with this isolated queen's pawn, and this is probably totally okay for black. I guess here probably white might just take control of this e5 square. I'm not sure exactly what white would do. But, I mean, c4 would just be a very committal move in the first place. So I wasn't sure if he actually wanted to do c4, but it definitely seemed like like rook c1 implies it, and you have to be a bit careful as black. But it should be totally fine for black here. And I wasn't sure whether or not I wanted to prevent it or not. I actually did end up preventing it. I played b5. And in hindsight, maybe that wasn't really necessary. I didn't really need to do that at all. I actually spent 4 minutes on this move. So it's the time control is game in 40, delay 5, and I just spent like 4 minutes. And I couldn't decide if I wanted to go f6 or h6 or a6 or rook c1 or b5. I thought they were all very reasonable, but I ended up going with b5 because I do have a minority of pawns on the queen side. So he has 4 and I have 3 pawns on the queen side. So I could start a minority attack and just try to soften up this pawn chain and create weaknesses. So b5 is a very normal move to do so. So I thought it made a lot of sense. And also the bonus was that it prevented c4, which seemed like his idea behind rook c1. So overall, I thought b5 was totally a decent move. I wasn't sure if it was the best or not, though. He plays b4. And one thing, like I found that move very interesting, because I realized later that one of his ideas might be to bring his knight from d2 to b3 to c5. And I realized, like, oh my gosh, if he gets a knight to c5, this knight is very, very, very good. And he actually has no problems in this position. And white, if a white knight can successfully get to c5, like, I need to make sure I have sufficient counterplay to just not be positionally very sad. Because if it gets c5 supported by these 2 pawns, it's going to be very, very difficult to remove. And if I do ever remove it, then he's going to have a protected pass pawn and a very annoying pawn at that. So I was very wary about this knight coming to c5. And I only thought about that really after I played f6. So f6 is an interesting move because it controls the e5 square really, really well. And so I could potentially expand in the center with the move e5. But it also just kicks the bishop as well. So he goes bishop h4. And this pawn is a bit weak, potentially. And this pawn is a bit weak if I never push it. And here my original intention was knight f5. And I thought for a long time here in this exact position. Although, okay, I thought for a long time. No, I didn't. Apparently, I was thinking about 4 minutes per move, in the from like move 11 to like move 16, which is pretty bad for a game in 40 time control. But oh man, but I was considering knight f5 here, but I actually dismissed it because knight b3. And if I do take, I wasn't sure what I was going to be doing. Like, what am I doing? Why am I allowing the knight to come to c5 so easily? I thought it might be totally fine, like if I just go f5, because now if he goes here, it is pretty annoying that it attacks my queen. But my idea is maybe not here, maybe here instead, queen f7. I can like take, and now this pawn is a bit weaker, and maybe I go a5. So I thought it would still probably be fine, but I ended up opting for a5 in this position. I'm not really sure why I chose a5 over knight f5. I think they're both fine, but I actually wanted to move relatively quickly. My opponent was moving pretty much instantly. Like after bishop h4, he had 36 minutes, and after a5, I had 25 minutes. So I'm spending like 3 minutes a move, 4 minutes a move, and I did want to move. I did want to pick up the pace. So, say a5 made a lot of sense to me because I'm either going to open the a file or play a4, which is what I did in the game, preventing the knight from going to b3 to c5. his other main way of getting to c5 is knight to e1 to d3 to c5. And that's one idea that I thought he was actually going to execute in the game, but he didn't. And I just remembered one thought I had. My one thought I had was that if I did go knight f4 and let's say knight b3, and then if I took something like this, and if I wanted to meet knight c5 with e5, well, this d5 pawn is very soft. Actually, both these pawns can be kind of weak. And I didn't like my e5 counterplay felt a little bit shaky. I just like that. My core memory was just unlocked right there. One of my ideas about this position. But maybe I don't have to go e5 immediately, and maybe I can allow the knight to stay on c5 for a little bit. But I was from looking at this from afar, in my brain, I was kind of scared of this. Because here e5 is too early because it just takes, and this pawn is hanging. So I was a little bit worried here. So that's why I decided to play a5. Because now you can't go knight b3 because this pawn is hanging. The b4 pawn is hanging after something like this. And what he did in the game, which was a3. Well, now I played knight f5 now. And after he moved his bishop, I just took it with the bishop, actually. I think I thought for a few moves on... Yeah, I thought for another 5 minutes. So I had 21 minutes before I played my move, and then I had 17 after I made this move. And it was a big decision, actually. Because whether or not to have this dark square bishop or to keep my two knights... And I actually decided that it would be better to keep the two knights here. And it's actually a really interesting decision. I think part of the reason why was because I think this knight is going to be really great on the d6 square. On the d6 square, it can hop forwards, it controls e4 and c4 very well. So if this knight on d2 ever moves, then I can hop into one of these squares potentially. And then also... this position is relatively closed. We both have 7 pawns. I guess relatively is not the right word. It's very closed. It's very closed, although this pawn break exists. But actually, after he takes back, I play a4. And now he can't go to b3. And one of my ideas was that if he goes to knight e1 now, well, now this knight on d2 hasn't moved. And so I can play e5. And my queen guards my pawn, and this knight isn't already moved attacking the d5 pawn. Or, sorry, this knight already hasn't moved, so the queen does not have vision on the d5 pawn after, if they did take. So I actually thought I had this extra option of e5 by playing a4 because the f knight is trying to reroute to c5 if he did want to try to get to c5. And I did think he would try to do that in the game at some point, but he never did, actually. So I thought a4 was a good move. It keeps the c3 a permanent weakness in the position, and I thought it was a good decision. But it's going to be a very, very slow maneuvering game, and yeah, it was, and it was a little bit stressful because I had a significantly lower amount of time. Like after a4, I had about 16 minutes after a4. Anyways, he played rook e1. Makes a lot of sense, putting it on the open file. And he is actually threatening queen e2. Like, if I play a lazy move like rook a7, queen e2 is just a double attack. The e6 pawn is hanging with the help of the rook, and this b5 pawn is also hanging. And that would be not good for me. So after rook e1, I play knight d6. Knight d6, it guards this b5 pawn. And now after queen e2, I go rook fe8. I thought about whether or not I wanted to go here and have my 2 rooks on these 2 files. I decided I want to keep this rook more flexible to going to c8, potentially. So I ended up going rook fe8. I also didn't have the most amount of time to think about it, but it is what it is. So now this pawn, it's well guarded. And he goes queen d3. So if I did want to go e5, once again, it's very hard to, because after the pawn takes, now this pawn is hanging with check. Like so. So queen d3, I think, is designed to make it harder for me to play e5. I think that's the purpose of it. And he also, as he does in the game, he wants to double his rooks. So I go knight e7. I actually think the knight on c6 isn't very useful, unless I'm going to play e5, which, as I just said, like e5 doesn't work because this pawn would be hanging. So I actually thought rerouting the knight to either to f5 to g or g6 would be very good, because this knight blocks the half-open c file. So this pawn could be a target if I move my knight out of the way. And I thought my knight would be better placed elsewhere. So I go knight e7, and he starts to double his rooks, and then I complete my knight reroute. And he has these two pieces, both his rooks targeting the e pawn. But luckily, I actually defended very well, and actually easily add more defenders. So, oh my gosh. Now in this position, he starts playing king f1, and it's very interesting from a strategy, from a time management perspective. He was just trying to play okay moves quickly, and this is very counter to me. So I also thought, like, in hindsight, I think this guy is relatively underrated, because he's good at being fairly solid. So it feels like he should be more around the 1600, 1700 level, would be my guess. But I feel like he's definitely made for like rapid, this quick classical time control of not like, for example, game in 90 with a 30-second bonus per move. That's a common time control for big tournaments. And like, I feel like this shorter time control suits him more because he's really good at just making quick decisions. And yeah, this position I don't think is the most pleasant for white. Maybe he thinks it's totally fine for white. I'm not sure. But he just starts shuffling his king because he doesn't want, because maybe he doesn't have any more ideas. I literally think he didn't have any more ideas in this position on how to improve his position anymore. So so multiple times throughout the game, he went king f1, king g1, king f1, king g1. And so I definitely felt like in this position, like I had to be able to push more. I think I can make more progress here. And yeah, I actually do. I make a lot of progress, and I end up actually getting like a winning position. I haven't checked with the engine yet, but I'm pretty sure. Anyways, he plays king f1, and I play king f7, and he goes king g1. So he's just shuffling his king a little bit. And well, now since this pawn is well defended with the rook and the queen, and what's even nicer, I can even bring my knight. This knight that was on c6 went to e7 to g6. It can also go backwards now to f8 and guard the h7 pawn from the queen and guard the e6 pawn. So it's actually, this knight is really, really awesome. A really, really awesome defensive piece. So I start doubling on the c file, and he decides to just go rook c1 and go king f1 again, because I don't think he has any more ideas in this position. And I go rook c6, and I'm planning to even triple up on this file. And let's say he goes king g1, queen c7, and now he might have to go knight b1. And this is one thing I was thinking about. And then I could go knight c4, attacking this pawn maybe, or maybe even knight e4, adding more pressure on this pawn. I thought something like this could possibly occur, and I liked my chances here, especially now this knight maybe can move back. Maybe I could even get this knight somewhere. Not sure. One interesting idea would be knight h8 to f7 to d6. That would be a very, very funny idea. Although I guess in this case, this pawn is hanging. I have to be careful not to let this b5 pawn hang. But I thought if he kept shuffling, he might be forced to bring his knight back to b8. Although I guess he could do this. Although I'm not convinced this is that okay for him. Yeah, I'm not convinced about this. Although in this particular example, I think this knight is hanging. Okay. Anyways, I thought that's one way the game could progress. But instead, he goes queen e3. And instead of continuing to shuffle his king back to g1 and f1. And his idea is pretty interesting. Well, firstly, he's attacking this pawn. And so if I do go queen c7, this pawn is just hanging. I can't triple up. So I just go knight f8. So guarding this pawn, like I said before. And now he goes queen f4. And with just a sly idea of knight e5. So if I go like rook c7, knight e5, check, and this pawn is pinned. This pawn is pinned by the queen, and so I can't take the knight. I have to move my king, and he takes my queen for free. So very little cheeky trick there. So I just move my king back. So I just move my king back to g8, and now he cannot go. Whoopsies. He cannot go knight e5 because I could just simply take it. So, and then he decides to go rook e3. So instead of going back to e3 with his queen, guarding this pawn, he decides to go rook e3, guarding this pawn. But now I triple up, and he goes king g1. Yeah, I'm not actually threatening anything here. Because if I do take, well, even though I have 1, 2, 3 attackers on this pawn, and he only has 1 and 2, if my queen was on c8 instead of c7, then it could work. But if I do it now, I lose my queen. My queen is one of the pieces that is getting traded, and that's not very good. So after king g8, rook here. Also, one thing to note is that this queen is really, really close to being trapped. Like for example, if I play h5, and if he makes a lazy move like king g1, this queen is trapped. Like, it's literally trapped. So I actually, in this position, I was trying to make ways to trap the queen work, but I couldn't find any ways to make it work, much to my dismay. I really tried. But I do actually make use of the weird positioning of the queen. Actually, I could have used this to win the game. I do go queen c7 in the game, but I realized, like, there's actually this really neat idea. He cannot go g4. It's just something really, really random. He can't go g4 because of knight c5, and this queen is undefended, and this rook is hanging. If you trade your queen, if you try to trade queens, I don't take back immediately. I actually take your rook with check, and after pawn takes, now I take your queen, and I have 2 rooks, and white only has 1. So actually, there was a little bit of a trick behind queen c7 in this position. Queen c7, a little trick. You can't go g4, but there's plenty of other moves, and he actually just goes king g1. So just shuffling. He's not taking long on his moves. He's just trying to play fast, and to his credit, I mean, it kind of worked out. I had a very low time. After queen c7, I had 9 minutes, and he had 13 minutes after rook e3, this move. And actually, after king g1, I go back to d7 because I don't want to trade queens. I want to move this knight to f5 and attack this rook, but I don't want to trade queens. So I go back to d7, and after he moves his king again, now I go knight f5. And if he moves his rook off of this rank, well, now this pawn is hanging on c3. So he actually has to go on d3, and I was like, this rook does not look well placed on the square, and this queen is also doesn't have many moves still. And here I played knight g6, and after queen g4, I think I did a very good job with this position. I'm actually very, very proud of myself in this position, because if you think about it, like, I really slowly improved my position. I put my 2 rooks on the c file. I had my knight on f8 to guard these 2 pawns, and then I moved it back to g6 after the queen moved. Like, I thought I was maneuvering in a really good way, and I was very proud of myself. And here I played rook c7, rook 8 c7, preparing to triple up with my queen on the back, on the very back of the it's called Alekine's gun, when you have 2 rooks and a queen on one file. So I have my queen in the back of the gun. But here I missed. After I made this move, I realized I missed a very, very key concept, which is e5. And e5, as far as I can tell, is simply winning. Like, there's nothing else to be said. It's It's just winning for white, or sorry, winning for black. I want to fork white's pieces, and if you take the pawn, there's another fork, and this queen is undefended. So after you take my knight, I take your queen for free. And if you move your queen, I don't even know where you move it. There's nowhere to move your queen. Let's say h3 because your queen's defended now. Well, now e4 just simply traps the rook. Like the rook is just trapped, and that's that. And it's with a check too. So if it wasn't with a check, you could take my queen for free. But since it's with a check, well, now I'm up a rook, and look at that, I'm even up a knight too. like, well, if you did move your rook from d3 to e3, I guess. So I was very I played rook 8c7, and I was like, oh my gosh, I had e5, and he played knight h4, and so I took, and then played e5 with the same idea, but now his rook has more space. So after queen e2, if I went e4, well, now he can even go rook h3, and his rook is alive at the very least. Maybe this is what I should have gone for, because in this position, maybe I have e3, cutting off the rook's vision on the c3 pawn. So after pawn takes, now I can just take this pawn. And what is the rook doing on h3? This might have been the way to play. I wish I did that, but I did not do that. So I was very, very sad when I saw that I missed the opportunity for e5, a move earlier. But I still thought my position was still pretty good. And eventually, yeah. And after queen e2, now I take this pawn. And my opponent is like, 500 points lower rated than me. But, oh my gosh, it took me until move 35 to finally win this pawn. And in this position, I had about 1 minute, 2 minutes left. And I actually stopped notating at around here. He played knight b1 in the game. And yeah, for anyone who doesn't know, if you or your opponent goes below 5 minutes, and when the time control has a 5-second delay, so before your timer starts ticking down, it delays for 5 seconds. When either opponent goes below 5 minutes, neither player needs to notate anymore. So I was very, very low on time. It's kind of what I'm trying to say here. And here I win a pawn though. So I could go e4 and make a rook go to h3, or I could just simply take the pawn. And my queen guards this open file from the white queen from infiltrating pretty well. And this pawn is pinned. The c3 pawn is pinned because if pawn takes, well, now this rook on c1 is free. And actually, you're going to lose a queen too. So the pawn is very much pinned. So he goes knight b1 just to protect the c3 pawn more. So after pawn takes, now he goes rook c3. I did not need to take the pawn on c3, but I honestly didn't really know what to do. In hindsight, maybe I would have taken this open file. If I were to go do an instant rewind, maybe taking this open file would have been good. Let's say after the queen moves, then I could take. I'm not sure if this is better than what I did in the game or not. Probably not much better. I'm not sure what I should have done. But point is, I can leave this tension here for a while because he can never take this pawn. Let's say I did a random move like this, for example. Oh, this is a bad move because of this, I think. Queen h5. I think I just have to go back, for example. Anyways, let's say I make a random move like b6. He can never take because I can just take this with my knight, and the pawn is still pinned. And yeah, I'm just up a pawn. I'm just simply up a pawn. Finally, after 35 moves, playing against someone 500 points lower rated than me. But I was very proud of myself for this position that I got here in the first place. All that to say, it did not last long because I didn't really have the time to figure out how to continue in this position. So I liquefied. And actually, I played knight d6 in this position because I wanted to reroute. I didn't think this knight belonged on f5. In hindsight, I could have just taken this pawn, and maybe I should have. Like for example, rook takes like this. For example, the white queen could get in, but I don't think it's that scary. And actually, well, I have to be careful of checkmate. Like for example, if I go check here and takes, this will just blunder checkmate in one. So I have to be careful of checkmate, but maybe it's not so bad. Like I kick the queen away, and black is probably doing pretty well here. I could see that. So maybe I should have just taken this h4 pawn. I kind of like to move knight d6, but what he does in the game is he goes queen d3, attacking the pawn, and then I move my knight, attacking this rook, and he trades once and goes rook e1, and it gets very, very tricky, and I end up defending kind of passively with rook d6. Time was ticking. I had definitely below a minute at this point. So I don't think I was making the best choice, but I don't know. Not too sure what else there is to do. There's no better way to defend the pawn, I don't think. If my knight could go to f6, that would have been great, but it cannot, unfortunately. So what ends up happening, he plays f3, and I pin the pawn. And after he moves his king, now I go knight g3. And if there was a place where there was a blunder, this would be it. Because he takes and goes knight c3, and my notation ended a few moves ago, but I know this position happened, and I think here I went knight e3. But even in this position itself, the knight on c, like both pawns are hanging, and like I can't defend this pawn that easily without losing this pawn, and so probably the queen trade was just straight up bad. I mean, it was just bad, I think. I'm not sure what else there is to do though. I think I have to trade queens at this point. So probably queen f5 was the really bad move. Maybe I should have just... I'm not even sure what to do here. Maybe go knight here, and after the king moves, go back to f5. Maybe this was one thing I should have done, and then gone knight e7. Maybe I should have slow played it, but then still knight c3 though. Knight c3 still happens, and this pawn is still hanging, and life is really tough and sad. So I'm not really sure what I should have done here. Oh, chess is very, very hard. I actually go on to lose this game, and that really, really, really hurt. And I'll show you this is something what the position sort of looked like. So here he has his passed pawn, and eventually we get into a position where I take and he wins this pawn on the edge of the board. Something like this occurs, and then like eventually he's able to... Oh wait, I have the board set up backwards. Oh, the pawns are going this way. Whoopsies. The pawn's supposed to be going this way. But eventually he trades off one of his pawns, and he's able to bring this pawn this way, and he's able to promote eventually. And that was pretty devastating, I'm not gonna lie. This game hurt a lot. Especially because my opponent was literally playing king g1, king f1. Like literally, like, because he didn't want to spend that much time on the moves, because it's a game in 40, delay 5 tournament. And so it definitely hurt a lot. This game hurt a lot, especially since I had this winning move e5, and I just did it one move too late. And I think this really shows why I'm 1900 for a good reason and a bad reason, and a bad reason. Like, I was able to just slowly improve. Like, I think starting from this position, like a5, I was really happy. Like, I liked my idea of trading off the dark split bishops for each other and playing a5 and just playing a very slow maneuvering game. I do think it would have been interesting if we tried to get a knight to c5. I would have loved to see what that would have been like. For example, in this position, what if after knight d6 he went knight e1 and tried to get it to d3 and then c5? He's still a few moves away from that. Maybe whenever he moves his knight away from f3, maybe that's when I go e5. That's definitely a possibility. But I would have been interested to see if you ever thought about getting a knight to c5 or not. Or maybe I was just too hyper-focused on it. I don't know. But I do think I was playing really, really good positional chess. Just slowly maneuvering, move my knight to g6 and even f8. And I thought that was really, really neat. And preparing the triple stack on the C file. Like, I think I did really, really well. And then missing this knockout blow of e5. Oh, man. Like I'm there. Like, I should have won this game, but should have is a very, very strong word because I didn't find the right resource at the right time. I had one moment to do that. One moment. I've been this whole game, I'm building up to this one moment. One moment to finally exploit the position of this rook and the queen, and I just miss it. And I'm still doing well afterwards, but I miss it. I miss the key moments, and my pawns are too weak, and I end up going not just, we don't even have just equal pawns. I'm down a pawn in the end game, and I end up losing this game. And it was a very rough start to tournament, especially considering my opponent was 600 points lower rated than me. So that was not a very super fun time, admittedly. But that's the name of the game. That is the name of the game. So with that being said, I think let's go hit the game review. And I hope to see you guys in the next one.